Chapter 94. Maximilian's Avowal. At the same moment, and Villefort's voice was heard calling from his study. "What is the matter?" Morel looked at Noirtier, who had recovered his self-command, and with a glance indicated the closet, where once before, under somewhat similar circumstances, he had taken refuge. He had only time to get his hat and throw himself breathless into the closet when the procureur's footstep was heard in the passage. Villefort sprang into the room, ran to Valentine, and took her in his arms. A physician, M.D. of Rigny," cried Villefort. "Or rather I will go for him myself." He flew from the apartment, and Morel at the same moment darted out at the other door. He had been struck to the heart by a frightful recollection. The conversation he had heard between the doctor and Villefort the night of Madame de Saint Méran's death recurred to him. These symptoms, to a less alarming extent, were the same which had preceded the death of Barrois. At the same time, Monte Cristo's voice seemed to resound in his ear with the words he had heard only 2 hours before. "Whatever you want, Morel, come to me. I have great power." More rapidly than thought, he darted down the Rue Matignon, and thence to the Avenue de Champs-Élysées. Meanwhile, de Villefort arrived in a hired cabriolet at M. de Avrigny's door. He rang so violently that the porter was alarmed. Villefort ran upstairs without saying a word. The porter knew him and let him pass, only calling to him. In his study, Monsieur Procureur, in his study, Villefort pushed, or rather forced, the door open. "Ah," said the doctor, "is it you?" "Yes," said Villefort, closing the door after him. "It is I, who am come in my turn to ask you if we are quite alone." "Doctor, my house is accursed." "What?" said the latter with apparent coolness, but with deep emotion. "Have you another invalid?" "Yes, doctor," cried Villefort, clutching his hair. "Yes." D'Avrigny's look implied, "I told you it would be so." Then he slowly uttered these words. "Who is now dying in your house? What new victim is going to accuse you of weakness before God?" A mournful sob burst from Villefort's heart. He approached the doctor, and seizing his arm, "Valentine," said he, "it is Valentine's turn." "Your daughter!" cried d'Avrigny with grief and surprise. "You see you were deceived," murmured the magistrate. "Come and see her, and on her bed of agony entreat her pardon for having suspected her." "Each time you have applied to me," said the doctor, "it has been too late. Still I will go. But let us make haste, sir. With the enemies you have to do with, there is no time to be lost." "Oh, this time, doctor, you should not have to reproach me with weakness. This time I will know the assassin and will pursue him. Let's try first to save the victim before we think of revenging her," said d'Avrigny. "Come." The same cabriolet which had brought Villefort took them back at full speed, and at this moment Morel rapped at Monte Cristo's door. The Count was in his study, and was reading with an angry look something which Bertuccio had brought in haste. Hearing the name of Morel, who had left him only 2 hours before, the Count raised his head, arose, and sprang to meet him. "What is the matter, Maximilian?" asked he. "You are pale, and the perspiration rolls from your forehead." Morel fell into a chair. "Yes," said he, "I came quickly. I wanted to speak to you." "Are all your family well?" asked the Count, with an affectionate benevolence, whose sincerity no one could for a moment doubt. "Thank you, Count, thank you," said the young man, evidently embarrassed how to begin the conversation. "Yes, every one of my family is well." "So much the better. Yet you have something to tell me," replied the Count with increased anxiety. "Yes," said Morel. "It is true. I have but now left the house where death has just entered, to run to you." "Are you then come from M. de Morcerf's?" asked Monte Cristo. "No," said Morel. "Is someone dead in his house?" "The general has just blown his brains out," replied Monte Cristo with great coolness. "Oh, what a dreadful event!" cried Maximilian. "Not for the Countess, or for Albert," said Monte Cristo. "A dead father or husband is better than a dishonored one. Blood washes out shame." "Poor Countess," said Maximilian. "I pity her very much. She is so noble a woman." "Pity Albert also, Maximilian, for believe me, he is the worthy son of the Countess. But let us return to yourself. You have hastened to me. Can I have the happiness of being useful to you?" "Yes, I need your help. That is, I thought like a madman that you could lend me your assistance in a case where God alone can succor me. Tell me what it is, replied Monte Cristo. Oh, said Moral, I know not. Indeed, if I may reveal this secret to mortal ears, but fatality impels me, necessity constrains me, Count. Moral hesitated. You think I love you, said Monte Cristo, taking the young man's hand affectionately in his. Oh, you encourage me, and something tells me there, placing his hand on his heart, that I ought to have no secret from you. You are right, Moral. God is speaking to your heart, and your heart speaks to you. Tell me what it says. Count, will you allow me to send Baptistin to inquire after someone you know? I am at your service, and still more my servants. Oh, I cannot live if she is not better. Shall I ring for Baptistin? No, I will go and speak to myself. Moral went out, called Baptistin, and whispered a few words to him. The valet ran directly. Well, have you sent? Asked Monte Cristo, seeing Moral return. Yes, and now I shall be more calm. You know I am waiting, said Monte Cristo, smiling. Yes, and I will tell you. One evening I was in a garden. A clump of trees concealed me. No one suspected I was there. 2 persons passed near me. Allow me to conceal their names of present. They were speaking in an undertone, and yet I was so interested in what they said that I did not lose a single word. This is a gloomy introduction, if I may judge from your pallor and shuddering Moral. Oh, yes, very gloomy, my friend. Someone had just died in the house to which that garden belonged. One of the persons whose conversation I overheard was the master of the house. The other, the physician. The former was confiding to the latter his grief and fear, for it was the second time within a month that death had suddenly and unexpectedly entered the house, which was apparently destined to destruction by some exterminating angel, as an object of God's anger. Ah, indeed? Said Monte Cristo, looking earnestly at the young man, and by an imperceptible movement turning his chair, so that he remained in the shade while the light fell full on Maximilian's face. Yes, continued Moral, death had entered that house twice within 1 month. And what did the doctor answer? Asked Monte Cristo. He replied that the death was not a natural one, and must be attributed to what? To poison. Indeed, said Monte Cristo with a slight cough which in moments of extreme emotion helped him to disguise a blush or his pallor or the intense interest with which he listened. Indeed, Maximilian, did you hear that? Yes, my dear Count, I heard it, and the doctor added that if another death occurred in a similar way he must appeal to justice. Monte Cristo listened, or appeared to do so, with the greatest calmness. Well, said Maximilian, death came a 3rd time, and neither the master of the house nor the doctor said a word. Death is now, perhaps, striking a 4th blow. Count, what am I bound to do, being in possession of this secret? My dear friend, said Monte Cristo, you appear to be relating an adventure which we all know by heart. I know the house where you heard it, or one very similar to it. A house with a garden, a master, a physician, and where there have been 3 unexpected and sudden deaths. Well, I have not intercepted your confidence, and yet I know all that as well as you, and I have no conscientious scruples. No, it does not concern me. You say an exterminating angel appears to have devoted the house to God's anger. Well, who says your supposition is not reality? Do not notice things which those whose interest it is to see them pass over. If it is God's justice, instead of his anger, which is walking through that house, Maximilian, turn away your face and let his justice accomplish its purpose. Moral shuddered. There was something mournful, solemn, and terrible in the Count's manner. Besides, continued he, in so changed a tone that no one would suppose it was the same person speaking. Besides, who says that it will begin again? It has returned, Count, exclaimed Moral. That is why I hasten to you. Well, what do you wish me to do? Do you wish me, for instance, to give information to procure? Monte Cristo uttered the last words with so much meaning that Moral, starting up, cried out, You know of whom I speak, Count, do you not? Perfectly well, my good friend, and I will prove it to you by putting the dots to the I, or rather by naming the persons. You were walking one evening in M. de Villefort's garden. From what you relate, I suppose it to be the evening of Madame de Saint-Mérin's death. You heard M. de Villefort talking to M. d'Avrigny about the death of M. de Saint Méran, and that no less surprising of the Countess. M. d'Avrigny said he believed they both proceeded from poison, and you, honest man, have ever since been asking your heart and sounding your conscience to know if you ought to expose or conceal the secret. We are no longer in the Middle Ages. There is no longer Verdict or free tribunals. What do you want to ask these people? Conscience, what hast thou to do with me? As Sterne said, my dear fellow, let them sleep on. If they are asleep, let them grow pale in their drowsiness, if they are disposed to do so, and pray do you remain in peace, who have no remorse to disturb you. Deep grief was depicted on Morrow's features. He seized Monte Cristo's hand. But it is beginning again, I say. Well, said the Count, astonished at his perseverance, which he could not understand, and looking still more earnestly at Maximilian. Let it begin again. It is like the house of the Atridae. God has condemned them, and they must submit to their punishment. They will all disappear, like the fabrics children build with cards, and which fall, one by one, under the breath of their builder. Even if there are 200 of them. 3 months since it was M. de Saint Méran, Madame de Saint Méran 2 months since. The other day it was Barrois. Today the old Noirtier or young Valentine. You knew it? Cried Morrow, in such a paroxysm of terror that Monte Cristo started. You whom the falling heavens would have found unmoved. You knew it and said nothing? And what is it to me? Replied Monte Cristo, shrugging his shoulders. Do I know those people? And must I lose the one to save the other? Faith, no, for between the culprit and the victim I have no choice. But I, cried Morrow, groaning with sorrow, I love her. You love whom? Cried Monte Cristo, starting to his feet and seizing the 2 hands which Morrow was raising toward heaven. I love most fondly. I love madly. I love as a man who would give his lifeblood to spare her a tear. I love Valentine de Villefort, who is being murdered at this moment. Do you understand me? I love her, and I ask God and you how I can save her. Monte Cristo uttered a cry which those only can conceive who have heard the roar of a wounded lion. Unhappy man, cried he, wringing his hands in his turn. You love Valentine, that daughter of an accursed race. Never had Morrow witnessed such an expression. Never had so terrible an eye flashed before his face. Never had the genius of terror he had so often seen, either on the battlefield or in the murderous nights of Algeria, shaken around in more dreadful fire. He drew back terrified. As for Monte Cristo, after this abolition, he closed his eyes as if dazzled by internal light. In a moment he restrained himself so powerfully that the tempestuous heaving of his breast subsided, as turbulent and foaming waves yield to the sun's genial influence when a cloud has passed. This silence, self-control, and struggle lasted about 20 seconds. Then the Count raised his pallid face. See, said he, my dear friend, how God punishes the most thoughtless and unfeeling men for their indifference, by presenting dreadful scenes to their view. I, who was looking on, an eager and curious spectator. I, who was watching the working of this mournful tragedy. I, who like a wicked angel was laughing at the evil men committed protected by secrecy. A secret is easily kept by the rich and powerful. I am in my turn bitten by the serpent whose tortuous course I was watching, and bitten to the heart. Morrow groaned. Come, come, continued the Count. Complaints are unavailing. Be a man. Be strong. Be full of hope, for I am here and will watch over you. Morrow shook his head sorrowfully. I tell you to hope. Do you understand me? Cried Monte Cristo. Remember that I never uttered a falsehood and am never deceived. It is 12 o'clock, Maximilian. Thank heaven that you came at noon rather than in the evening or tomorrow morning. Listen, Morrow, it is noon. If Valentine is not now dead, she will not die. How so? Cried Morrow. When I left her dying? Monte Cristo pressed his hands to his forehead. What was passing in that brain, so loaded with dreadful secrets? What does the angel of light or the angel of darkness say to that mind, at once implacable and generous? God only knows. Monte Cristo raised his head once more, and this time he was calm as a child awaking from its sleep. Maximilian, said he, return home. I command you not to stir. Attempt nothing, not to let your countenance betray a thought, and I will send you tidings. Go. Oh, Count, you overwhelm me with that coolness. Have you, then, power against death? Are you superhuman? Are you an angel? And the young man, who had never shrunk from danger, shrank before Monte Cristo with indescribable terror. But Monte Cristo looked at him with so melancholy and sweet a smile that Maximilian felt the tears filling his eyes. "I can do much for you, my friend," replied the Count. "Go, I must be alone." Moral. Subdued by the extraordinary ascendancy Monte Cristo exercised over everything around him, did not endeavor to resist it. He pressed the Count's hand and left. He stopped one moment at the door for Baptistin, whom he saw in the Rue Matignon, and who was running. Meanwhile, Villefort and D'Avrigny had made all possible haste. Valentine had not revived from her fainting fit on their arrival, and the doctor examined the invalid with all the care the circumstances demanded, and with an interest which the knowledge of the secret intensified twofold. Villefort, closely watching his countenance and his lips, awaited the result of the examination. Noirtier, paler than even the young girl, more eager than Villefort for the decision, was watching also intently and affectionately. At last D'Avrigny slowly uttered these words. "She is still alive." "Still," cried Villefort. "Oh, doctor, what a dreadful word is that!" "Yes," said the physician, "I repeat it. She is still alive, and I am astonished at it." "But is she safe?" asked the father. "Yes, since she lives." At that moment D'Avrigny's glance met Noirtier's eye. It glistened with such extraordinary joy, so rich and full of thought, that the physician was struck. He placed the young girl again on the chair. Her lips were scarcely discernible, they were so pale and white, as well as her whole face, and remained motionless, looking at Noirtier, who appeared to anticipate and commend all he did. "Sir," said D'Avrigny to Villefort, "call Mademoiselle Valentine's maid, if you please." Villefort went himself to find her, and D'Avrigny approached Noirtier. "Have you something to tell me?" asked he. The old man winked his eyes expressively, which we may remember was his only way of expressing his approval. "Privately?" "Yes." "Well, I will remain with you." At this moment Villefort returned, followed by the lady's maid, and after her came Madame de Villefort. "What is the matter, then, with this dear child?" "She has just left me, and she complained of being indisposed, but I did not think seriously of it." The young woman, with tears in her eyes and every mark of affection of a true mother, approached Valentine and took her hand. D'Avrigny continued to look at Noirtier. He saw the eyes of the old man dilate and become round, his cheeks turn pale and tremble. The perspiration stood in drops upon his forehead. "Ah!" said he, involuntarily following Noirtier's eyes, which were fixed on Madame de Villefort, who repeated, "This poor child will be better in bed. Come, Fanny, we will put her to bed." D'Avrigny, who saw that it would be a means of his remaining alone with Noirtier, expressed his opinion that it was the best thing that could be done, but he forbade that anything should be given to her except what he ordered. They carried Valentine away. She had revived, but could scarcely move or speak, so shaken was her frame by the attack. She had, however, just power to give one parting look to her grandfather, who in losing her seemed to be resigning his very soul. D'Avrigny followed the invalid, wrote a prescription, ordered Villefort to take a cabriolet, go in person to a chemist to get the prescribed medicine, bring it himself, and wait for him in his daughter's room. Then, having renewed his injunction not to give Valentine anything, he went down again to Noirtier, shut the doors carefully, and after convincing himself that no one was listening, "Do you," said he, "know anything of this young lady's illness?" "Yes," said the old man. "We have no time to lose. I will question, and do you answer me?" Noirtier made a sign that he was ready to answer. "Did you anticipate the accident which has happened to your granddaughter?" "Yes." D'Avrigny reflected a moment. Then, approaching Noirtier, "Pardon what I am going to say," added he, "but no indication should be neglected in this terrible situation. Did you see poor Barrois die?" Noirtier raised his eyes to heaven. "Do you know of what he died?" asked D'Avrigny, placing his hand on Noirtier's shoulder. "Yes," replied the old man. "Do you think he died a natural death?" A sort of smile was discernible on the motionless lips of Noirtier. "Then you have thought that Barrois was poisoned?" "Yes." "Do you think the poison he fell a victim to was intended for him?" "No." Do you think the same hand which unintentionally struck Barois has now attacked Valentine? Yes. Then will she die too? Asked D'Avrigny, fixing his penetrating gaze on Noirtier. He watched the effect of this question on the old man. No, replied he with an air of triumph which would have puzzled the most clever diviner. Then you hope? Said D'Avrigny, with surprise. Yes. What do you hope? The old man made him understand with his eyes that he could not answer. Ah, yes, it is true, murmured D'Avrigny. Then, turning to Noirtier, do you hope the assassin will be tried? No. Then you hope the poison will take no effect on Valentine? Yes. It is no news to you, added D'Avrigny, to tell you that an attempt has been made to poison her? The old man made a sign that he entertained no doubt upon the subject. Then how do you hope Valentine will escape? Noirtier kept his eyes steadfastly fixed on the same spot. D'Avrigny followed the direction and saw that they were fixed on a bottle containing the mixture which he took every morning. Ah, indeed, said D'Avrigny, struck with sudden thought. Has it occurred to you? Noirtier did not let him finish. Yes, said he, to prepare her system to resist poison? Yes, by accustoming her by degrees. Yes, said Noirtier, delighted to be understood. Of course, I had told you that there was brucine in the mixture I give you. Yes, and by accustoming her to that poison, you have endeavored to neutralize the effect of a similar poison? Noirtier's joy continued. And you have succeeded, exclaimed D'Avrigny. Without that precaution, Valentine would have died before assistance could have been procured. The dose has been excessive, but she has only been shaken by it. And this time, at any rate, Valentine will not die. A superhuman joy expanded the old man's eyes, which were raised toward heaven with an expression of infinite gratitude. At this moment, Villefort returned. Here, doctor, said he, is what you sent me for. Was this prepared in your presence? Yes, replied the procureur. Have you not let it go out of your hands? No. D'Avrigny took the bottle, poured some drops of the mixture contained in the hollow of his hand, and swallowed them. Well, said he, let us go to Valentine. I will give instructions to everyone, and you and de Villefort will yourself see that no one deviates from them. At the moment when D'Avrigny was returning to Valentine's room, accompanied by Villefort, an Italian priest of serious demeanor and calm and firm tone, hired for his use the house adjoining the hotel of M. de Villefort. No one knew how the three former tenants of that house left it. About 2 hours afterwards, its foundation was reported to be unsafe, but the report did not prevent the new occupant establishing himself there with his modest furniture the same day at 5 o'clock. The lease was drawn up for 3, 6, or 9 years by the new tenant, who, according to the rule of the proprietor, paid 6 months in advance. This new tenant, who, as we have said, was an Italian, was called Il Signor Giacomo Busoni. Workmen were immediately called in, and that same night the passengers at the end of the Faubourg saw with surprise that carpenters and masons were occupied in repairing the lower part of the tottering house. Chapter 95. Father and Daughter. We saw in a preceding chapter how Madame Danglars went formally to announce to Madame de Villefort the approaching marriage of Eugénie Danglars and M. Andrea Cavalcanti. This formal announcement, which implied or appeared to imply the approval of all the persons concerned in this momentous affair, had been preceded by a scene to which our readers must be admitted. We beg them to take one step backward and to transport themselves, the morning of that day of great catastrophes, into the showy, gilded salon we have before shown them, and which was the pride of its owner, Baron Danglars. In this room, at about 10 o'clock in the morning, the banker himself had been walking to and fro for some minutes thoughtfully and in evident uneasiness, watching both doors and listening to every sound. When his patience was exhausted, he called his valet. Etienne, said he, see why Mademoiselle Eugénie has asked me to meet her in the drawing-room, and why she makes me wait so long. Having given this vent to his ill humor, the Baron became more calm. Mademoiselle Danglars had that morning requested an interview with her father, and had fixed on the gilded drawing-room as the spot. The singularity of this step, and above all its formality, had not a little surprised the banker, who had immediately obeyed his daughter by repairing first to the drawing-room. Etienne soon returned from his errand. Mademoiselle's lady's maid says, sir, that mademoiselle is finishing her toilette and will be here shortly. Danglars nodded, to signify that he was satisfied. To the world and to his servants, Danglars assumed the character of the good-natured man and the indulgent father. This was one of his parts in the popular comedy he was performing, a makeup he had adopted and which suited him about as well as the masks worn on the classic stage by paternal actors, who, seen from one side, were the image of geniality, and from the other showed lips drawn down in chronic ill temper. Let us hasten to say that in private the genial side descended to the level of the other, so that generally the indulgent man disappeared to give place to the brutal husband and domineering father. Why the devil does that foolish girl, who pretends to wish to speak to me, not come into my study? And why on earth does she want to speak to me at all? He was turning this thought over in his brain for the 20th time, when the door opened and Eugenie appeared, attired in a figured black satin dress, her hair dressed and gloves on, as if she were going to the Italian opera. Well, Eugenie, what is it you want with me? And why in this solemn drawing room when the study is so comfortable? I quite understand why you ask, sir, said Eugenie, making a sign that her father might be seated. And in fact, your two questions suggest fully the theme of our conversation. I will answer them both. And contrary to the usual method, the last first, because it is the least difficult. I have chosen the drawing room, sir, as our place of meeting, in order to avoid the disagreeable impressions and influences of a banker's study. Those gilded cash books, drawers locked like gates of fortresses, heaps of bank bills, come from I know not where, and the quantities of letters from England, Holland, Spain, India, China, and Peru have generally a strange influence on a father's mind, and make him forget that there is in the world an interest greater and more sacred than the good opinion of his correspondents. I have, therefore, chosen this drawing room, where you see, smiling and happy in their magnificent frames, your portrait, mine, my mother's, and all sorts of rural landscapes and touching pastorals. I rely much on external impressions. Perhaps, with regard to you, they are immaterial, but I should be no artist if I had not some fancies. Very well, replied M. Danglars, who had listened to all this preamble with imperturbable coolness, but without understanding a word, since like every man burdened with thoughts of the past, he was occupied with seeking the thread of his own ideas in those of the speaker. There is, then, the second point cleared up, or nearly so, said Eugenie, without the least confusion, and with that masculine pointedness which distinguished her gesture and her language, and you appear satisfied with the explanation. Now, let us return to first. You asked me why I have requested this interview. I will tell you in 2 words, sir. I will not marry Count Andrea Cavalcanti. Danglars leaped from his chair and raised his eyes and arms towards heaven. Yes, indeed, sir, continued Eugenie, still quite calm. You are astonished, I see. For since this little affair began, I have not manifested the slightest opposition, and yet I am always sure, when the opportunity arrives, to oppose a determined and absolute will to people who have not consulted me, and things which displease me. However, this time, my tranquility or passiveness, as philosophers say, proceeded from another source. It proceeded from a wish, like a submissive and devoted daughter. A slight smile was observable on the purple lips of the young girl, to practice obedience. Well, asked Danglars. Well, sir, replied Eugenie, I have tried to the very last, and now that the moment has come, I feel in spite of all my efforts that it is impossible. But, said Danglars, whose weak mind was at first quite overwhelmed with the weight of this pitiless logic, marking evident premeditation and force of will, what is your reason for this refusal, Eugenie? What reason do you assign? My reason, replied the young girl. Well, it is not that the man is more ugly, more foolish, or more disagreeable than any other. No, M. Andrea Cavalcanti may appear to those who look at men's faces and figures as a very good specimen of his kind. It is not, either, that my heart is less touched by him than any other. That would be a schoolgirl's reason, which I consider quite beneath me. I actually love no one, sir, you know it, do you not? I do not then see why, without real necessity, I should encumber my life with a perpetual companion. Has not some sage said, nothing too much? And another, I carry all my effect with me? I have been taught these 2 aphorisms in Latin and in Greek. One is, I believe, from Phaedrus, and the other from Bias. Well, My dear father, in the shipwreck of life, for life is an eternal shipwreck of our hopes, I cast into the sea my useless encumbrance. That is all, and I remain with my own will disposed to live perfectly alone and consequently perfectly free. Unhappy girl, murmured Danglars, turning pale, for he knew from long experience the solidity of the obstacle he had so suddenly encountered. Unhappy girl, replied Eugenie. Unhappy girl, do you say, sir? No. Indeed, the exclamation appears quite theatrical and affected. Happy, on the contrary, for what am I in want of? The world calls me beautiful. It is something to be well received. I like a favorable reception. It expands a countenance, and those around me do not then appear so ugly. I possess a share of wit and a certain relative sensibility, which enables me to draw from life in general. For the support of mine, all I meet with that is good, like the monkey who cracks the nut to get at its contents. I am rich, for you have one of the first fortunes in France. I am your only daughter, and you are not so exacting as the fathers of the Porte Saint Martin and Gaieté, who disinherit their daughters for not giving them grandchildren. Besides, the provident law has deprived you of the power to disinherit me, at least entirely, as it has also the power to compel me to marry monsieur this or monsieur that. And so, being beautiful, witty, somewhat talented, as the comic operas say, and rich, and that is happiness, sir, why you call me unhappy? Danglars, seeing his daughter smiling and proud even to insolence, could not entirely repress his brutal feelings, but they betrayed themselves only by an exclamation, under the fixed and inquiring gaze leveled at him from under those beautiful black eyebrows. He prudently turned away, and calmed himself immediately, daunted by the power of a resolute mind. Truly, my daughter, replied he with a smile, you are all you boast of being, excepting one thing. I will not too hastily tell you which, but would rather leave you to guess it. Eugenie looked at Danglars, much surprised that one flower of her crown of pride, with which she had so superbly decked herself, should be disputed. My daughter, continued the banker, you have perfectly explained to me the sentiments which influence a girl like you, who is determined she will not marry. Now it remains for me to tell you the motives of a father like me, who has decided that his daughter shall marry. Eugenie bowed, not as a submissive daughter, but as an adversary prepared for a discussion. My daughter, continued Danglars, when a father asks his daughter to choose a husband, he has always some reason for wishing her to marry. Some are affected with the mania of which you spoke just now, that of living again in their grandchildren. This is not my weakness. I tell you at once, family joys have no charm for me. I may acknowledge this to a daughter whom I know to be philosophical enough to understand my indifference, and not to impute it to me as a crime. This is not to the purpose, said Eugenie. Let us speak candidly, sir. I admire candor. Oh, said Danglars, I can, when circumstances render desirable, adopt your system, although it may not be my general practice. I will therefore proceed. I have proposed to you to marry, not for your sake, for indeed I did not think of you in the least at the moment. You admire candor, and will now be satisfied, I hope, but because it suited me to marry you as soon as possible, on account of certain commercial speculations I am desirous of entering into. Eugenie became uneasy. It is just as I tell you, I assure you, and you must not be angry with me, for you have sought this disclosure. I do not willingly enter into arithmetical explanations when artists like you, who fears to enter my study lest she should imbibe disagreeable or anti-poetic impressions and sensations. But in that same banker's study, where you very willingly presented yourself yesterday to ask for 1,000 francs I give you monthly for pocket money, you must know, my dear young lady, that many things may be learned, useful even to a girl who will not marry. There one may learn, for instance, what, out of regard to your nervous susceptibility, I will inform you of in the drawing room, namely, that the credit of a banker is his physical and moral life, that credit sustains him as breath animates the body, and de Monte Cristo once gave me a lecture on that subject, which I have never forgotten. There we may learn that as credit sinks, the body becomes a corpse, and this is what must happen very soon to the banker who is proud to own so good a logician as you for his daughter. But Eugenie, instead of stooping, drew herself up under the blow. Ruined, said she. Exactly, my daughter. That is precisely what I mean, said Danglars, almost digging his nails into his breast. while he preserved on his harsh features the smile of the heartless though clever man. Ruined. Yes, that is it. Ah, said Eugenie. Yes, ruined. Now it is revealed, the secret so full of horror, as the tragic poet says. Now, my daughter, learn from my lips how you may alleviate this misfortune, so far as it will affect you. Oh, cried Eugenie, you're a bad physiognomist. If you imagine I deplore on my own account the catastrophe of which you warn me, I ruined, and what will that signify to me? Have I not my talent left? Can I not, like pasta, Molly Brand, greasy, acquire for myself what you would never have given me, whatever might have been your fortune, 100 or 150,000 livres per annum, for which I shall be indebted to no one but myself, and which, instead of being given as you gave me those poor 12,000 francs, with sour looks and reproaches for my prodigality, will be accompanied with acclamations, with bravos, and with flowers? And if I do not possess that talent, which your smiles prove to me you doubt, should I not still have that ardent love of independence, which will be a substitute for wealth, and which in my mind supersedes even the instinct of self-preservation? No, I grieve not on my own account. I shall always find a resource, my books, my pencils, my piano, all the things which cost but little, and which I shall be able to procure, will remain my own. Do you think that I sorrow for Madame Danglars? Undeceive yourself again. Either I am greatly mistaken, or she has provided against a catastrophe which threatens you, and which will pass over without affecting her. She has taken care for herself. At least I hope so, for her attention has not been diverted from her projects by watching over me. She has fostered my independence by professedly indulging my love for liberty. Oh, no, sir. From my childhood I have seen too much, and understood too much of what has passed around me, for misfortune to have an undue power over me. From my earliest recollections, I have been beloved by no one. So much the worse. That has naturally led me to love no one. So much the better. Now you have my profession of faith. Then, said Danglars, pale with anger, which was not at all due to offended paternal love. Then, mademoiselle, you persist in your determination to accelerate my ruin? Your ruin? I accelerate your ruin? What do you mean? I do not understand you. So much the better. I have a ray of hope left. Listen. I am all attention, said Eugenie, looking so earnestly at her father that it was an effort for the latter to endure her unrelenting gaze. M. Volcani, continued Danglars, is about to marry you, and will place in my hands his fortune, amounting to 3,000,000 livres. That is admirable, said Eugenie with sovereign contempt, smoothing her gloves out one upon the other. You think I shall deprive you of those 3,000,000, said Danglars, but do not fear it. They are destined to produce at least 10. I and a brother banker have obtained a grant of a railway, the only industrial enterprise which in these days promises to make of the fabulous prospects that law once held out to the eternally deluded Parisians in the fantastic Mississippi scheme. As I look at it, a million part of a railway is worth fully as much as an acre of wasteland on the banks of the Ohio. We make in our case a deposit on a mortgage, which is an advance, as you see, since we gain at least 10, 15, 20, or 100 livres worth of iron in exchange for our money. Well, within a week I am to deposit 4 millions for my share. The 4 millions, I promise you, will produce 10 or 12. But during my visit to you the day before yesterday, sir, which you appear to recollect so well, replied Eugenie, I saw you arranging a deposit, is not that the term, of 5 millions and a half. You even pointed out to me in 2 drafts on the Treasury, and you were astonished that so valuable a paper did not dazzle my eyes like lightning. Yes, but those 5 millions and a half are not mine, and are only a proof of the great confidence placed in me. My title of popular banker has gained me the confidence of charitable institutions, and the 5 millions and a half belong to them. At any other time I should not have hesitated to make use of them, but the great losses I have recently sustained are well known, and, as I told you, my credit is rather shaken. That deposit may be at any moment withdrawn, and if I had employed it for another purpose, I should bring on me a disgraceful bankruptcy. I do not despise bankruptcies, believe me, but they must be those which enrich, not those which ruin. Now, if you marry M. Cavalcante and I get the 3 millions, or even if it is thought I am going to get them, my credit will be restored, and my fortune, which for the last month or two has been swallowed up in gulfs which have been opened in my path by an inconceivable fatality, will revive. Do you understand me? Perfectly. You pledge me for 3 millions, do you not? The greater the amount, the more flattering it is to you. It gives you an idea of your value. Thank you. One word more, sir. Do you promise me to make what use you can of the report of the fortune M. Cavalcanti will bring without touching the money? This is no act of selfishness, but of delicacy. I am willing to help rebuild your fortune, but I will not be an accomplice in the ruin of others. But since I tell you, cried Danglars, that with these 3 million, do you expect to recover your position, sir, without touching those 3 million? I hope so, if the marriage should take place and confirm my credit. Shall you be able to pay M. Cavalcanti the 500,000 francs you promised of my dowry? He shall receive them on returning from the mayor's. Very well. What next? What more do you want? I wish to know if, in demanding my signature, you leave me entirely free in my person? Absolutely. Then, as I said before, sir, very well. I am ready to marry M. Cavalcanti. But what are you up to? Ah, that is my affair. What advantage should I have over you, if knowing your secret I were to tell you mine? Danglars bit his lips. Then, said he, you are ready to pay the official visits, which are absolutely indispensable? Yes, replied Eugenie. And to sign the contract in 3 days? Yes. Then, in my turn, I also say very well. Danglars pressed his daughter's hand in his. But, extraordinary to relate, the father did not say, "Thank you, my child," nor did the daughter smile at her father. Is the conference ended? Asked Eugenie, rising. Danglars motioned that he had nothing more to say. 5 minutes afterwards, a piano resounded to the touch of Mademoiselle d'Armilly's fingers, and Mademoiselle Danglars was singing Brabantio's Malediction on Desdemona. At the end of the piece, Etienne entered and announced to Eugenie that the horses were the carriage, and that the Baroness was waiting for her to pay her visits. We have seen them at Villefort's. They proceeded then on their course. Volume 5, Chapter 96. The Contract. 3 days after the scene we had just described, namely towards 5 o'clock in the afternoon of the day fixed for the signature of the contract between Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Andrea Cavalcanti, whom the banker persisted in calling Prince, a fresh breeze was stirring the leaves in the little garden in front of the Count of Monte Cristo's house, and the Count was preparing to go out, while his horses were impatiently pawing the ground, held in by the coachman, who had been seated a quarter of an hour on his box. The elegant phaeton with which we are familiar rapidly turned the angle of the entrance gate, and cast out on the doorsteps M. Andrea Cavalcanti, as decked up and gay as if he were going to marry a princess. He inquired after the Count with his usual familiarity, and ascending lightly to the first story met him at the top of the stairs. The Count stopped on seeing the young man. As for Andrea, he was launched, and when he was once launched, nothing stopped him. "Ah, good morning, my dear Count," said he. "Ah, Andrea," said the latter, with his half-jesting tone. "How do you do?" "Charmingly, as you see. I am come to talk to you about 1,000 things. But first tell me, were you going out or just returned?" "I was going out, sir." "Then, in order not to hinder you, I will get up with you, if you please, in your carriage, and Tom shall follow with my phaeton in tow." "No," said the Count, with an imperceptible smile of contempt, for he had no wish to be seen in the young man's society. "No, I prefer listening to you here. My dear Andrea, we can chat better indoors, and there is no coachman to overhear our conversation." The Count returned to a small drawing room on the first floor, sat down, and crossing his legs motioned to the young man to take a seat also. Andrea assumed his gayest manner. "You know, my dear Count," said he, "the ceremony is to take place this evening. At 9 o'clock the contract is to be signed at my father-in-law's." "Ah, indeed," said Monte Cristo. "What, is it news to you? Has not M. Danglars informed you of the ceremony?" "Oh, yes," said the Count. "I received a letter from him yesterday, but I do not think the hour was mentioned. Possibly my father-in-law trusted to its general notoriety." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you are fortunate, M. Cavalcanti. It is a most suitable alliance you are contracting, and Mademoiselle Danglars is a handsome girl." "Yes, indeed she is," replied Cavalcanti, in a very modest tone. Above all, she is very rich. At least I believe so, said Monte Cristo. Very rich, do you think? Replied the young man. Doubtless. It is said M. Danglars conceals at least half of his fortune. And he acknowledges 15 or 20 millions, said Andrea with a look sparkling with joy. Without reckoning, added Monte Cristo, that he is on the eve of entering into a sort of speculation already in vogue in the United States and in England, but quite novel in France. Yes, I know what you mean. The railway, of which he has obtained a grant, is it not? Precisely. It is generally believed he will gain 10 millions by that affair. 10 millions? Do you think so? It is magnificent, said Cavalcanti, who was quite confounded at the metallic sound of these golden words. Without reckoning, replied Monte Cristo, that all his fortune will come to you, and justly too, since Mademoiselle Danglars is an only daughter. Besides, your own fortune, as your father assured me, is almost equal to that of your betrothed. But enough of money matters. Do you know, Andrea, I think you have managed this affair rather skillfully. Not badly by any means, said the young man. I was born for a diplomatist. Well, you must become a diplomatist. Diplomacy, you know, is something that is not to be acquired. It is instinctive. Have you lost your heart? Indeed, I fear it, replied Andrea, in the tone in which he had heard Durandi or Valier reply to Alceste at the Théâtre Français. Is your love returned? I suppose so, said Andrea with a triumphant smile, since I am accepted, but I must not forget one grand point, which, that I have been singularly assisted. Nonsense. I have, indeed. By circumstances? No, by you. By me? Not at all, Prince, said Monte Cristo, laying a marked stress on the title. What have I done for you? Are not your name, your social position, and your merit sufficient? No, said Andrea. No, it is useless for you to say so, Count. I maintain that the position of a man like you has done more than my name, my social position, and my merit. You are completely mistaken, sir, said Monte Cristo coldly, who felt the perfidious maneuver of the young man, and understood the bearing of his words. You only acquired my protection after the influence and fortune of your father had been ascertained. For after all, who procured for me, who had never seen either you or your illustrious father, the pleasure of your acquaintance? Two of my good friends, Lord Wilmore and the Abbé Busoni. What encouraged me not to become your surety, but to patronize you? Your father's name, so well known in Italy and so highly honored. Personally, I did not know you. This calm tone and perfect ease made Andrea feel that he was, for the moment, restrained by a more muscular hand than his own, and that the restraint could not be easily broken through. Oh, then my father is really a very large fortune, Count? It appears so, sir, replied Monte Cristo. Do you know if the marriage settlement he promised me has come? I have been advised of it. But the 3 millions? The 3 millions are probably on the road. Then I shall really have them? Oh, well, said the Count, I do not think you have yet known the want of money. Andrea was so surprised that he pondered the matter for a moment. Then, arousing from his reverie, Now, sir, I have one request to make to you, which you will understand, even if it should be disagreeable to you. Proceed, said Monte Cristo. I have formed an acquaintance, thanks to my good fortune, with many noted persons, and have, at least a moment, a crowd of friends. But marrying, as I am about to do, before all Paris, I ought to be supported by an illustrious name, and in the absence of paternal hand, some powerful one ought to lead me to the altar. Now, my father is not coming to Paris, is he? He is old, covered with wounds, and suffers dreadfully, he says, in traveling. I understand. Well, I am come to ask a favor of you. Of me? Yes, of you. And pray what may it be? Well, to take his part. Ah, my dear sir, what? After the very relations I have had the happiness to sustain towards you, can it be that you know me so little as to ask such a thing? Ask me to lend you 500,000, and, although such a loan is somewhat rare, on my honor, you would annoy me less. No. Then, what I thought I'd already told you, that in participation in this world's affairs, more especially in their moral aspects, The Count of Monte Cristo has never ceased to entertain the scruples and even the superstitions of the East. I, who have a seraglio at Cairo, one at Smyrna, and one at Constantinople, preside at a wedding? Never. Then you refuse me? Decidedly. And were you my son or my brother, I would refuse you in the same way. But what must be done, said Andrea, disappointed. You said just now that you had 100 friends. Very true, but you introduced me at M. Dangler's. Not at all. Let us recall the exact facts. You met him at a dinner party at my house, and you introduced yourself at his house. That is a totally different affair. Yes, but by my marriage you have forwarded that. Aye, not in the least. I beg you to believe. Recollect what I told you when you asked me to propose you. Oh, I never make matches, my dear prince. It is my settled principle. Andrea bit his lips. But at least you will be there? Will all Paris be there? Oh, certainly. Well, like all Paris, I shall be there too, said the Count. And will you sign the contract? I see no objection to that. My scruples do not go thus far. Well, since you will grant me no more, I must be content with what you give me. But one word more, Count. What is it? Advice. Be careful. Advice is worse than service. Oh, you can give me this without compromising yourself. Tell me what it is. Is my wife's fortune 500,000 livres? That is a summum, Danglars himself announced. Must I receive it, or leave it in the hands of the notary? This is the way such affairs are generally arranged when it is wished to do them stylishly. Your two solicitors appoint a meeting, when the contract is signed, for the next or following day. Then they exchange the two portions, for which they each give a receipt. Then, when the marriage is celebrated, they place the amount at your disposal as the chief member of the alliance. Because, said Andrea, with a certain ill-concealed uneasiness, I thought I heard my father-in-law say that he intended embarking our property in that famous railway affair which he spoke just now. Well, replied Monte Cristo, it will be the way, everybody says, of trebling your fortune in 12 months. Baron Danglars is a good father and knows how to calculate. In that case, said Andrea, everything is all right, excepting your refusal, which quite grieves me. You must attribute it only to natural scruples under similar circumstances. Well, said Andrea, let it be as you wish. This evening, then, at 9 o'clock. Adieu till then. Notwithstanding a slight resistance on the part of Monte Cristo, whose lips turned pale, but who preserved a ceremonious smile, Andrea seized the Count's hand, pressed it, jumped into his phaeton, and disappeared. The 4 or 5 remaining hours before 9 o'clock arrived, Andrea employed in riding, paying visits, designed to induce those of whom he had spoken to appear at the bankers in their gayest equipages, dazzling them by promises of shares and schemes which have since turned every brain, and in which Danglars was just taking the initiative. In fact, at 8:30 in the evening, the grand salon, the gallery adjoining, and the 3 other drawing rooms on the same floor, were filled with a perfumed crowd, who sympathized but little in the event, but who all participated in that love of being present wherever there is anything fresh to be seen. An academician would say that the entertainment of the fashionable world are collections of flowers which attract inconstant butterflies, famished bees, and buzzing drones. No one could deny that the rooms were splendidly illuminated. The light streamed forth on the gilt moldings and the silk hangings, and all the bad taste of decorations, which had only their richness to boast of, shone in its splendor. Mademoiselle Eugenie was dressed with elegant simplicity in a figured white silk dress, and a white rose half concealed in her jet black hair was her only ornament, unaccompanied by a single jewel. Her eyes, however, betrayed that perfect confidence which contradicted the girlish simplicity of this modest attire. Madame Danglars was chatting at a short distance with Debray, Beauchamp, and Château. Debray was admitted to the house for this grand ceremony, but on the same plane with everyone else, and without any particular privilege. Danglars, surrounded by deputies and men connected with the revenue, was explaining a new theory of taxation which he intended to adopt when the course of events had compelled the government to call him into the ministry. Andrea, on whose arm hung one of the most consummate dandies of the opera, was explaining to him rather cleverly, since he was obliged to be bold to appear at ease, his future projects, and the new luxuries he meant to introduce to Parisian fashions with 175,000 livres per annum. The crowd moved to and fro in the rooms like an ebb and flow of turquoises, rubies, emeralds, opals, and diamonds. As usual, the oldest women were the most decorated, and the ugliest the most conspicuous. If there was a beautiful lily or a sweet rose, you had to search for it, concealed in some corner behind a mother with a turban, or an ant with a bird of paradise. At each moment, in the midst of the crowd, the buzzing, and the laughter, the doorkeeper's voice was heard announcing some name well known in the financial department, respected in the army, or illustrious in the literary world, and which was acknowledged by a slight movement in the different groups. But for one whose privilege it was to agitate that ocean of human waves, how many were received with a look of indifference or a sneer of disdain? At the moment when a hand of the massive timepiece, representing Endymion asleep, pointed to 9 on its golden face, and the hammer, the faithful type of mechanical thought, struck 9 times, the name of the Count of Monte Cristo resounded in its turn, and as if by an electric shock, all the assembly turned towards the door. The Count was dressed in black, and with his habitual simplicity, his white waistcoat displayed his expansive, noble chest, and his black stock was singularly noticeable because of its contrast with the deadly paleness of his face. His only jewelry was a chain, so fine that the slender gold thread was scarcely perceptible on his white waistcoat. A circle was immediately formed around the door. The Count perceived at one glance Madame Danglars at one end of the drawing room, M. Danglars at the other, and Eugenie in front of him. He first advanced toward the Baroness, who was chatting with Madame de Villefort, who had come alone, Valentine being still an invalid. And without turning aside, so clear was the road left for him, he passed from the Baroness to Eugenie, whom he complimented in such rapid and measured terms that the proud artist was quite struck. Near her was Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly, who thanked the Count for the letters of introduction he had so kindly given her for Italy, which he intended immediately to make use of. On leaving these ladies, he found himself with Danglars, who had advanced to meet him. Having accomplished these 3 social duties, Monte Cristo stopped, looking around with that expression peculiar to a certain class, which seems to say, "I have done my duty, now let others do theirs." Andrea, who was in an adjoining room, had shared in the sensation caused by the arrival of Monte Cristo, and now came forward to pay his respects to the Count. He found him completely surrounded. All were eager to speak to him, as is always the case with those whose words are few and weighty. The solicitors arrived at this moment and arranged their scrawled papers on the velvet cloth embroidered with gold which covered the table prepared for the signature. It was a gilt table supported on lion's claws. One of the notaries sat down, the other remained standing. They were about to proceed to the reading of the contract, which half Paris assembled was to sign. All took their places, or rather the ladies formed a circle, while the gentlemen, more indifferent to the restraints of what Boileau calls a style énergique, commented on the feverish agitation of Andrea, on M. Danglars' riveted attention, Eugenie's composure, and the light and sprightly manner in which the Baroness treated this important affair. The contract was read during a profound silence, but as soon as it was finished, the buzz was redoubled through all the drawing rooms. The brilliant sums, the rolling millions which were to be at the command of the 2 young people, and which crowned the display of the wedding presents and the young lady's diamonds, which had been made in a room entirely appropriated for that purpose, had exercised to the full their delusions over the envious assembly. Mademoiselle Danglars' charms were heightened in the opinion of the young men, and for the moment seemed to outvie the sun in splendor. As for the ladies, it is needless to say that while they coveted the millions, they thought they did not need them for themselves, as they were beautiful enough without them. Andrea, surrounded by his friends, complimented, flattered, beginning to believe in the reality of his dream, was almost bewildered. The notary solemnly took the pen, flourished it above his head, and said, "Gentlemen, we are about to sign the contract." The Baron was to sign first, then the representative of M. Cavalcanti, Sr., then the Baroness, afterwards a future couple, as they are styled in the abominable phraseology of legal documents. The Baron took the pen and signed, then the representative. The Baroness approached, leaning on Madame de Villefort's arm. "My dear," said she as she took the pen, "is it not vexatious? An unexpected incident in the affair of murder and theft at the Count of Monte Cristo's, in which he nearly fell a victim, deprives us of the pleasure of seeing M. de Villefort. Indeed, said M. Danglars in the same tone in which you would have said, "Oh, well, what do I care?" "As a matter of fact," said Monte Cristo, approaching, "I am much afraid that I am the involuntary cause of his absence." "What, you count?" said Madame Danglars, signing. "If you are, take care, for I shall never forgive you." Andrea pricked up his ears. "But it is not my fault, as I shall endeavor to prove." Everyone listened eagerly. Monte Cristo, who so rarely opened his lips, was about to speak. "You remember," said the Count, during the most profound silence, "that the unhappy wretch who came to rob me died at my house. The supposition is that he was stabbed by his accomplice on attempting to leave it." "Yes," said Danglars. "In order that his wounds might be examined, he was undressed, and his clothes were thrown into a corner, where the police picked them up, with the exception of the waistcoat, which they overlooked." Andrea turned pale and drew toward the door. He saw a cloud rising in the horizon, which appeared to forebode a coming storm. "Well, this waistcoat was discovered today, covered with blood, and with a hole over the heart." The ladies screamed, and 2 or 3 prepared to faint. "It was brought to me. No one could guess what the dirty rag could be. I alone suspected that it was the waistcoat of the murdered man. My valet, in examining this mournful relic, felt a paper in the pocket and drew it out. It was a letter addressed to you, Baron." "To me?" cried Danglars. "Yes, indeed, to you. I succeeded in deciphering your name under the blood with which the letter was stained," replied Monte Cristo, amid the general outburst of amazement. "But," asked Madame Danglars, looking at her husband with uneasiness, "how could that prevent M. de Villefort?" "In this simple way, madame," replied Monte Cristo. "The waistcoat and the letter were both what is termed circumstantial evidence. I therefore sent them to the king's attorney. You understand, my dear baron, that legal methods are the safest in criminal cases. It was, perhaps, some plot against you." Andrea looked steadily at Monte Cristo and disappeared in the second drawing room. "Possibly," said Danglars. "Was not this murdered man an old galley slave?" "Yes," replied the Count, "a felon named Catterus." Danglars turned slightly pale. Andrea reached the anteroom beyond the little drawing room. "But go on signing," said Monte Cristo. "I perceive that my story has caused a general emotion, and I beg to apologize to you, Baroness, and to Mademoiselle Danglars." The Baroness, who had signed, returned the pen to the notary. "Prince Cavalcanti," said the latter. "Prince Cavalcanti, where are you?" "Andrea, Andrea," repeated several young people, who were already on sufficiently intimate terms with him to call him by his Christian name. "Call the prince. Inform him that it is his turn to sign," cried Danglars to one of the floor-keepers. But at the same instant the crowd of guests rushed in alarm into the principal salon, as if some frightful monster had entered the apartments. Quirins quem deveret. There was, indeed, reason to retreat, to be alarmed, and to scream. An officer was placing 2 soldiers at the door of each drawing-room, and was advancing towards Danglars, preceded by a commissary of police, girded with his scarf. Madame Danglars uttered a scream and fainted. Danglars, who thought himself threatened, certain consciences are never calm, Danglars, even before his guests, showed a countenance of abject terror. "What is the matter, sir?" asked Monte Cristo, advancing to meet the commissioner. "Which of you gentlemen," asked the magistrate, without replying to the Count, "answers to the name of Andrea Cavalcanti?" A cry of astonishment was heard from all parts of the room. They searched, they questioned. "But who then is Andrea Cavalcanti?" asked Danglars in amazement. "A galley slave, escaped from confinement at Toulon." "And what crime has he committed?" "He is accused," said the commissary with his inflexible voice, "of having assassinated the man named Catterus, his former companion in prison, at the moment he was making his escape from the house of the Count of Monte Cristo." Monte Cristo cast a rapid glance around him. Andrea was gone. Chapter 97. The Departure for Belgium. A few minutes after the scene of confusion produced in the salons of M. Danglars by the unexpected appearance of a brigade of soldiers, and by the disclosure which had followed, the mansion was deserted with as much rapidity as if a case of plague or of cholera morbus had broken out among the guests. In a few minutes, through all the doors, down all the staircases, by every exit, Everyone hastened to retire, or rather to fly, for it was a situation where the ordinary condolences, which even the best friends are so eager to offer in great catastrophes, were seen to be utterly futile. There remained in the banker's house only Danglars, closeted in his study, and making a statement to the officer gendarmes. Madame Danglars, terrified, in the boudoir with which we are acquainted, and Eugenie, who with haughty air and disdainful lip had retired to her room with her inseparable companion, Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. As for the numerous servants, more numerous that evening than usual, for their number was augmented by cooks and butlers from the Café de Paris, venting on their employers their anger at what they termed the insult to which they had been subjected, they collected in groups in the hall, in the kitchens, or in their rooms, thinking very little of their duty, which was thus naturally interrupted. Of all this household, only two persons deserve our notice. These are Mademoiselle Eugenie Danglars and Mademoiselle Louise d'Armilly. The betrothed had retired, as we said, with haughty air, disdainful lip, and the demeanor of an outraged queen, followed by her companion, who was paler and more disturbed than herself. On reaching her room, Eugenie locked her door, while Louise fell on a chair. "Ah, what a dreadful thing," said the young musician. "Who would have suspected it? Andrea Cavalcanti, murderer. A galley slave escaped, a convict." An ironical smile curled the lip of Eugenie. "In truth, I was fated," said she. "I escaped the Morcerf only to fall into the Cavalcanti. Oh, do not confound the two, Eugenie. Hold your tongue. The men are all infamous, and I am happy to be able now to do more than detest them. I despise them." "What shall we do?" asked Louise. "What shall we do?" "Yes. Why, the same we had intended doing 3 days since set off." "What? Although you are not now going to be married, you intend still." "Listen, Louise. I hate this life of the fashionable world, always ordered, measured, ruled, like our music paper. What I have always wished for, desired, and coveted is the life of an artist, free and independent, relying only on my own resources and accountable only to myself. Remain here? What for? That they may try, a month hence, to marry me again, and to whom? Debray, perhaps, as it was once proposed. No, Louise, no. This evening's adventure will serve for my excuse. I did not seek one. I did not ask for one. God sends me this, and I hail it joyfully." "How strong and courageous you are," said the fair, frail girl to her brunette companion. "Did you not yet know me? Come, Louise, let's talk of our affairs." The post-chaise was happily bought 3 days since. "Have you had it sent where we are to go for it?" "Yes." "Our passport?" "Here it is." And Eugenie, with her usual precision, opened a printed paper and read, Léon d'Armilly, 20 years of age, profession artist, hair black, eyes black, traveling with a sister. Capital. How did you get this passport? When I went to ask Edmond Monte Cristo for letters to the directors of the theaters at Rome and Naples, I expressed my fears of traveling as a woman. He perfectly understood them, and undertook to procure for me a man's passport, and 2 days after I received this, to which I have added with my own hand, traveling with his sister. "Well," said Eugenie cheerfully, "we have then only to pack up our trunks. We shall start the evening of the signing of the contract, instead of the evening of the wedding. That is all. But consider the matter seriously, Eugenie." "Oh, I am done with considering. I am tired of hearing only of market reports, of the end of the month, of the rise and fall of Spanish funds, of Haitian bonds. Instead of that, Louise, do you understand? Air, liberty, melody of birds, plains of Lombardy, Venetian canals, Roman palaces, the Bay of Naples. How much have we, Louise?" The young girl to whom this question was addressed drew from an inlaid secrétaire a small portfolio with a lock, in which she counted 23 banknotes. 23,000 francs, said she. "And as much, at least, in pearls, diamonds, and jewels," said Eugenie. "We are rich. With 45,000 francs, we can live like princesses for 2 years and comfortably for 4. But before 6 months, you with your music and I with my voice, we shall double our capital. Come, you shall take charge of the money. I have a jewel box, so that if one of us had the misfortune to lose her treasure, the other would still have hers left. Now, the portmanteau. Let us make haste. The portmanteau." "Stop," said Louise, going to listen at Madame Danglars' door. "What do you fear?" "That we may be discovered. The door is locked. They may tell us to open it. They may if they like, but we will not. You are a perfect Amazon, Eugenie." And the two young girls began to heap into a trunk all the things they thought they should require. "There now," said Eugenie. "While I change my costume, do you lock the portmanteau?" Louise pressed with all the strength of her little hands on the top of the portmanteau. "But I cannot," said she. "I am not strong enough. Do you shut it?" "Ah, you do well to ask," said Eugenie, laughing. "I forgot that I was Hercules, and you only the pale Omphale." And the young girl, kneeling on the top, pressed the two parts of the portmanteau together, and Mademoiselle Darmelie passed the bolt of the padlock through. When this was done, Eugenie opened a drawer, of which she kept the key, and took from a wadded violet silk traveling cloak. "Here," said she, "you see I have thought of everything. With this cloak you will not be cold. But you? Oh, I am never cold, you know. Besides, with these men's clothes. Will you dress here?" "Certainly. Shall you have time? Do not be uneasy, you little coward. All our servants are busy, discussing the grand affair. Besides, what is there astonishing, when you think of the grief I ought to be in, that I shut myself up? Tell me." "No, truly, you comfort me. Come and help me." From the same drawer she took a man's complete costume, from the boots to the coat, and a provision of linen, where there was nothing superfluous, but every requisite. Then, with a promptitude which indicated that this was not the first time she had amused herself by adopting the garb of the opposite sex, Eugenie drew on the boots and pantaloons, tied her cravat, buttoned her waistcoat up the throat, and put on a coat which admirably fitted her beautiful figure. "Oh, that is very good. Indeed, it is very good," said Louise, looking at her with admiration. "But that beautiful black hair, those magnificent braids, which made all the ladies sigh with envy, will they go under a man's hat like the one I see down there?" "You shall see," said Eugenie, and with her left hand seizing the thick mass, which her long fingers could scarcely grasp, she took in her right hand a pair of long scissors, and soon the steel met through the rich and splendid hair, which fell in a cluster at her feet as she leaned back to keep it from her coat. Then she grasped the front hair, which she also cut off without expressing the least regret. On the contrary, her eyes sparkled with greater pleasure than usual under her ebony eyebrows. "Oh, the magnificent hair," said Louise with regret. "And am I not 100 times better thus?" cried Eugenie, smoothing the scattered curls of her hair, which had now quite a masculine appearance. "And do you not think me handsomer so?" "Oh, you are beautiful, always beautiful," cried Louise. "Now, where are you going?" "To Brussels, if you like. It is the nearest frontier. We can go to Brussels, Liège, Aix-la-Chapelle, then up the Rhine to Strasbourg. We will cross Switzerland and go down into Italy by the St. Gothard. Will that do?" "Yes." "What are you looking at?" "I am looking at you. Indeed, you are adorable like that. One would say you were carrying me off. And they would be right. Pardieu." "Oh, I think you swore, Eugenie." And the two young girls, whom everyone might have thought plunged in grief, the one on her own account, the other from interest in her friend, burst out laughing, as they cleared away every visible trace of the disorder which had naturally accompanied the preparations for their escape. Then, having blown out the lights, the two fugitives, looking and listening eagerly, with outstretched necks, opened the door of a dressing room which led by a side staircase down to the yard, Eugenie going first, and holding with one arm the portmanteau, which by the opposite hand of Mademoiselle Darmelie scarcely raised with both hands. The yard was empty. The clock was striking 12. The porter was not yet gone to bed. Eugenie approached softly and saw the old man sleeping soundly in an armchair in his lodge. She returned to Louise, took up the portmanteau, which she had placed for a moment on the ground, and they reached the archway under the shadow of the wall. Eugenie concealed Louise in an angle of the gateway, so that if the porter chanced to awake, he might see but one person. Then, placing herself in the full light of the lamp which lit the yard, "Gate!" cried she, with her finest contralto voice, and rapping at the window. The porter got up as Eugenie expected, and even advanced some steps to recognize the person who was going out. But seeing a young man striking his boot impatiently with his riding whip, he opened it immediately. Louise slid to the half-open gate like a snake, and bounded lightly forward. Eugenie, apparently calm, although in all probability her heart beat somewhat faster than usual, went out in her turn. A porter was passing, and they gave him the portmanteau. Then the two young girls, having told him to take it to number 36, Rue de la Victoire, walked behind this man, whose presence comforted Louise. As for Eugenie, she was as strong as a Judith or a Delilah. They arrived at the appointed spot. Eugenie ordered the porter to put down the portmanteau, gave him some pieces of money, and having rapped at the shutter, sent him away. The shutter where Eugenie had rapped was that of a little laundress, who had been previously warned, and was not yet gone to bed. She opened the door. "Mademoiselle," said Eugenie, "let the porter get the post-chaise from the coach-house, and fetch some post-horses from the hotel. Here are 5 francs for his trouble." "Indeed," said Louise, "I admire you, and I could almost say respect you." The laundress looked on in astonishment, but as she had been promised 20 louis, she made no remark. In a quarter of an hour, the porter returned with a postboy and horses, which were harnessed, and put in the post-chaise in a minute, while the porter fastened the portmanteau on with the assistance of a cord and strap. "Here's the passport," said the postilion. "Which way are we going, young gentleman?" "To Fontainebleau," replied Eugenie with an almost masculine voice. "What do you say?" said Louise. "I am giving them the slip," said Eugenie. "This woman to whom we have given 20 louis may betray us for 40. We will soon alter our direction." And the young girl jumped into the britska, which was admirably arranged for sleeping in, without scarcely touching the step. "You are always right," said the music teacher, seating herself by the side of her friend. A quarter of an hour afterwards, a postilion, having been put in the right road, passed with crack of his whip through the gateway of the Barrière Saint-Martin. "Ah," said Louise, breathing freely, "here we are out of Paris." "Yes, my dear, the abduction is an accomplished fact," replied Eugenie. "Yes, and without violence," said Louise. "I shall bring that forward as an extenuating circumstance," replied Eugenie. These words were lost in the noise which the carriage made in rolling over the pavement of La Villette. Danglars no longer had a daughter. Chapter 98. The Bell and Bottle Tavern. And now let us leave Mademoiselle Danglars and her friend pursuing their way to Brussels, and return to poor Andrea Cavalcanti, so inopportunely interrupted in his rise to fortune. Notwithstanding his youth, Master Andrea was a very skillful and intelligent boy. We have seen that on the first rumor which reached the salon, he had gradually approached the door, and crossing 2 or 3 rooms at last disappeared. But we have forgotten to mention one circumstance, which nevertheless ought not to be omitted. In one of the rooms he crossed, the trousseau of the bride-elect was on exhibition. There were caskets of diamonds, cashmere shawls, Valenciennes lace, English veils, and in fact all the tempting things, the bare mention of which makes the hearts of young girls bound with joy, and which is called the corbel. Now, in passing through this room, Andrea proved himself not only to be clever and intelligent, but also provident, for he helped himself to the most valuable of the ornaments before him. Furnished with this plunder, Andrea leaped with a lighter heart from the window, intending to slip to the hands of the gendarmes. Tall and well-proportioned as an ancient gladiator, and muscular as a Spartan, he walked for a quarter of an hour without knowing where to direct his steps, actuated by the sole idea of getting away from the spot where if he lingered he knew that he would surely be taken. Having passed through the Rue du Mont Blanc, guided by the instinct which leads thieves always to take the safest path, he found himself at the end of the Rue Lafayette. There he stopped, breathless and panting. He was quite alone. On one side was a vast wilderness of the Saint-Lazare, on the other, Paris enshrouded in darkness. "Am I to be captured?" he cried. "No, not if I can use more activity than my enemies. My safety is now a mere question of speed." At this moment, he saw a cab at the top of the Faubourg Poissonnière. The dull driver, smoking his pipe, was plodding along toward the limits of the Faubourg Saint-Denis, where no doubt he ordinarily had a station. "Ho, friend," said Benedetto. "What do you want, sir?" asked the driver. "Is your horse tired?" "Tired? Oh, yes, tired enough. He has done nothing the whole of this blessed day. For wretched fares, and 20 sous over, making in all 7 francs, are all that I have earned, and I ought to take 10 to the owner. Will you add these 20 francs to the 7 you have?" "With pleasure, sir. 20 francs are not to be despised. Tell me what I am to do for this." A very easy thing if your horse isn't tired. I tell you he'll go like the wind. Only tell me which way to drive. Towards the Louvres. I know the way. You get good sweetin' rum over there. Exactly so. I merely wish to overtake one of my friends, with whom I am going to hunt tomorrow at Château and Serval. He should have waited for me here with a cabriolet till 11:30. It is 12, and tired of waiting, he must have gone on. It is likely. Well, will you try and overtake him? Nothing I should like better. If you do not overtake him before we reach Bourget, you shall have 20 francs. If not before Louvres, 30. And if we do overtake him, 40, said Andrea, after a moment's hesitation, at the end of which he remembered that he might safely promise. That's all right, said the man. Hop in and we're off. Whoa, PLA. Andrea got into the cab, which passed rapidly through the Faubourg Saint-Denis, along the Faubourg Saint-Martin, crossed the barrier, and threaded its way through the interminable Villette. They never overtook the chimerical friend, yet Andrea frequently inquired of people on foot whom he passed, and at the inns which were not yet closed, for a green cabriolet and bay horse. And as there are a great many cabriolets to be seen on the road to the Low Countries, and as 9/10 of them are green, the inquiries increased at every step. Everyone had just seen it pass. It was only 500, 200, 100 steps in advance. At length they reached it, but it was not the friend. Once the cab was also passed by a calash rapidly whirled along by 2 post horses. Ah, said Cavalcanti to himself, if I only had that Britska, those 2 good post horses, and above all the passport that carries them on. And he sighed deeply. The calash contained Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly. Hurry, hurry, said Andrea. We must overtake him soon. And the poor horse resumed the desperate gallop it had kept up since leaving the barrier, and arrived steaming at Louvres. Certainly, said Andrea. I shall not overtake my friend, but I shall kill your horse. Therefore I had better stop. Here are 30 francs. I will sleep at the Cheval Rouge, and will secure a place in the first coach. Good night, friend. And Andrea, after placing 6 pieces of 5 francs each in the man's hand, leaped lightly onto the pathway. The cabman joyfully pocketed the sum, and turned back on his road to Paris. Andrea pretended to go towards the Hotel de Cheval Rouge, but after leaning an instant against the door and hearing the last sound of the cab, which was disappearing from view, he went on his road, and with a lusty stride soon traversed the space of 2 leagues. Then he rested. He must be near Château and Serval, where he pretended to be going. It was not fatigue that stayed Andrea here. It was that he might form some resolution, adopt some plan. It would be impossible to make use of a diligence. Equally so to engage post horses. To travel either way a passport was necessary. It was still more impossible to remain in the department of the Oise, one of the most open and strictly guarded in France. This was quite out of question, especially to a man like Andrea, perfectly conversant with criminal matters. He sat down by the side of the moat, buried his face in his hands, and reflected. 10 minutes after he raised his head, his resolution was made. He threw some dust over the topcoat, which he had found time to unhook from the antechamber and button over his ball costume, and going to Château and Serval, he knocked loudly at the door of the only inn in the place. The host opened. My friend, said Andrea, I was coming from Mortefontaine to Senlis when my horse, which is a troublesome creature, stumbled and threw me. I must reach Compiègne tonight, or I shall cause deep anxiety to my family. Could you let me hire a horse of you? An innkeeper has always a horse to let, whether it be good or bad. The host called the stable boy and ordered him to saddle Leblanc. Then he awoke his son, a child of 7 years, whom he ordered to ride before the gentleman and bring back the horse. Andrea gave the innkeeper 20 francs, and in taking them from his pocket, dropped a visiting card. This belonged to one of his friends at the Café de Paris, so that the innkeeper, picking it up after Andrea had left, was convinced that he had led his horse to the Count of Monte 25 Rue Saint-Dominique, that being the name and address on the card. Leblanc was not a fast animal, but he kept up an easy, steady pace. In 3 hours and a half, Andrea had traversed the 9 leagues which separated him from Compiègne, and 4 o'clock struck as he reached the place where the coaches stop. There is an excellent tavern at Compiègne, well remembered by those who have ever been there. Andrea, who had often stayed there in his rides about Paris, recollected the Bell and Bottle Inn. He turned around, saw the sign by the light of a reflected lamp, and having dismissed the child, giving him all the small coin he had about him, he began knocking at the door, very reasonably concluding that having now 3 or 4 hours before him, he had best fortify himself against the fatigues of the morrow by a sound sleep and a good supper. A waiter opened the door. "My friend," said Andrea, "I've been dining at St. Genis-Exbois and expected to catch the coach which passes by at midnight, but like a fool I have lost my way and have been walking for the last 4 hours in the forest. Show me into one of those pretty little rooms which overlook the court, and bring me a cold fowl and a bottle of Bordeaux." The waiter had no suspicions. Andrea spoke with perfect composure. He had a cigar in his mouth and his hands in the pocket of his top coat. His clothes were fashionably made, his chin smooth, his boots irreproachable. He looked merely as if he had stayed out very late. That was all. While the waiter was preparing his room, the hostess arose. Andrea assumed his most charming smile and asked if he could have number 3, which he had occupied on his last stay at Compiègne. Unfortunately, number 3 was engaged by a young man who was traveling with his sister. Andrea appeared in despair, but consoled himself when the hostess assured him that number 7, prepared for him, was situated precisely the same as number 3, and while warming his feet and chatting about the last races at Chantilly, he waited until they announced his room to be ready. Andrea had not spoken without cause of the pretty rooms looking out upon the court of the Belle Hotel, which was triple galleries like those of theater, with the jessamine and clematis twining round the light columns, forms one of the prettiest entrances to an inn that you can imagine. The fowl was tender, the wine old, the fire clear and sparkling, and Andrea was surprised to find himself eating with as good an appetite as though nothing had happened. Then he went to bed and almost immediately fell into that deep sleep, which is sure to visit men of 20 years of age, even when they are torn with remorse. Now, here we are obliged to own that Andrea ought to have felt remorse, but that he did not. This was the plan which had appealed to him to afford the best chance of his security. Before daybreak, he would awake, leave the inn after rigorously paying his bill, and reaching the forest, he would, under pretense of making studies in painting, test the hospitality of some peasants, procure himself the dress of a woodcutter and a hatchet, casting off the lion's skin to assume that of the woodman. Then, with his hands covered with dirt, his hair darkened by means of a leaden comb, his complexion embrowned with a preparation for which one of his old comrades had given him the recipe, he intended, by following the wooded districts, to reach the nearest frontier, walking by night and sleeping the day in the forests and quarries, and only entering inhabited regions to buy a loaf from time to time. Once past the frontier, Andrea proposed making money of his diamonds, and by uniting the proceeds to 10 banknotes he always carried about with him in case of accident, he would then find himself possessor of about 50,000 livres, which he philosophically considered as no very deplorable condition after all. Moreover, he reckoned much on the interest of the Danglars to hush up the rumor of their own misadventures. These were the reasons which, added to fatigue, caused Andrea to sleep so soundly. In order that he might wake early, he did not close the shutters, but contented himself with bolting the door and placing on the table an unclasped and long-pointed knife, whose temper he well knew, and which was never absent from him. About 7 in the morning, Andrea was awakened by a ray of sunlight, which played, warm and brilliant, upon his face. In all well-organized brains, the predominating idea, and there always is one, is sure to be the last thought before sleeping, and the first upon waking in the morning. Andrea had scarcely opened his eyes when his predominating idea presented itself, and whispered in his ear that he had slept too long. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. A gendarme was crossing the court. A gendarme is one of the most striking objects in the world, even to a man void of uneasiness. But for one who has a timid conscience, and with good cause too, the yellow, blue, and white uniform is really very alarming. "Why is that gendarme there?" asked Andrea of himself. Then, all at once, he replied, with that logic which the reader has, doubtless, remarked in him, "There is nothing astonishing in seeing a gendarme at an inn. Instead of being astonished, let me dress myself." And the youth dressed himself with a facility his valet de chambre had failed to rob him of during the 2 months of fashionable life he had led in Paris. "Now then," said Andrea, while dressing himself, "I'll wait till he leaves, and then I'll slip away." And, saying this, Andrea, who had now put on his boots and cravat, stole gently to the window, and a second time lifted up the muslin curtain. Not only was the first gendarme still there, But the young man now perceived a second yellow, blue, and white uniform at the foot of the staircase, the only one by which he could descend, while a third on horseback, holding a musket in his fist, was posted as a sentinel at the great street door which alone afforded the means of egress. The appearance of the third gendarme settled the matter, for a crowd of curious loungers was extended before him, effectually blocking the entrance to the hotel. "They're after me," was Andrea's first thought. Diable! A pallor overspread the young man's forehead, and he looked around him with anxiety. His room, like all those on the same floor, had but one outlet to the gallery in the sight of everybody. "I am lost," was his second thought. And, indeed, for a man in Andrea's situation, an arrest meant the assizes, trial, and death without mercy or delay. For a moment he convulsively pressed his head within his hands, and during that brief period he became nearly mad with terror. But soon a ray of hope glimmered in the multitude of thoughts which bewildered his mind, and a faint smile played upon his white lips and pallid cheeks. He looked around and saw the object of his search upon the chimney-piece. They were a pen, ink, and paper. With forced composure he dipped the pen in the ink, and wrote the following lines upon a sheet of paper. "I have no money to pay my bill, but I am not a dishonest man. I leave behind me as a pledge this pin, worth 10 times the amount. I shall be excused for leaving at daybreak, for I was ashamed." He then drew the pin from his cravat and placed it on the paper. This done, instead of leaving the door fastened, he drew back the bolts and even placed the door ajar, as though he had left the room, forgetting to close it, and slipping into the chimney like a man accustomed to that kind of gymnastic exercise. After replacing the chimney board, which represented Achilles with Deidamia, and effacing the very marks of his feet upon the ashes, he commenced climbing the hollow tunnel which afforded him the only means of escape left. At this precise time, the first gendarme Andrea had noticed walked upstairs, preceded by the commissary of police and supported by the second gendarme who guarded the staircase, and was himself reinforced by the one stationed at the door. Andrea was indebted for this visit to the following circumstances. At daybreak, the telegraphs were set at work in all directions, and almost immediately the authorities in every district had exerted their utmost endeavors to arrest the murderer of Catullus. Compiègne, that royal residence and fortified town, is well furnished with authorities, gendarmes, and commissaries of police. They therefore began operations as soon as the telegraphic dispatch arrived, and the Bell and Bottle being the best-known hotel in the town, they had naturally directed their first inquiries there. Now, besides the reports of the sentinels guarding the Hotel de Ville, which is next door to the Bell and Bottle, it had been stated by others that a number of travelers had arrived during the night. The sentinel, who was relieved at 6 o'clock in the morning, remembered perfectly that, just as he was taking his post a few minutes past 4, a young man arrived on horseback, with a little boy before him. The young man, having dismissed the boy and horse, knocked at the door of the hotel, which was opened and again closed after his entrance. This late arrival had attracted much suspicion, and the young man being no other than Andrea, the commissary and gendarme, who was a brigadier, directed their steps towards his room. They found the door ajar. Oh, said the brigadier, who thoroughly understood the trick. "A bad sign to find the door open. I would rather find it triply bolted." And, indeed, the little note and pen upon the table confirmed, or rather corroborated, the sad truth. Andrea had fled. We say corroborated, because the brigadier was too experienced to be convinced by a single proof. He glanced around, looked in the bed, shook the curtains, opened the closets, and finally stopped at the chimney. Andrea had taken the precaution to leave no traces of his feet in the ashes, but still it was an outlet, and in this light was not to be passed over without serious investigation. The brigadier sent for some sticks and straw, and having filled the chimney with them, set a light to it. The fire crackled, and the smoke ascended like the dull vapor from a volcano, but still no prisoner fell down, as they expected. The fact was that Andrea, at war with society ever since his youth, was quite as deep as a gendarme. Even though he were advanced to the rank of brigadier, and quite prepared for fire, he had climbed out on the roof and was crouching down against the chimney pots. At one time he thought he was saved, for he heard the brigadier exclaim in a loud voice to the two gendarmes, "He is not here." But venturing to peep, he perceived that the latter, instead of retiring, as might have been reasonably expected upon this announcement, were watching with increased attention. It was now his turn to look about him. The Hôtel de Ville, a massive 16th century building, was on his right. Anyone could ascend from the openings in the tower and examine every corner of the roof below, and Andrea expected momentarily to see the head of a gendarme appear at one of these openings. If once discovered, he knew he would be lost, for the roof afforded no chance of escape. He therefore resolved to descend, not through the same chimney by which he had come up, but by a similar one conducting to another room. He looked around for a chimney from which no smoke issued, and having reached it, he disappeared through the orifice without being seen by anyone. At the same minute, one of the little windows of the Hôtel de Ville was thrown open, and the head of a gendarme appeared. For an instant it remained motionless as one of the stone decorations of the building. Then, after a long sigh of disappointment, the head disappeared. The brigadier, calm and dignified as the law he represented, passed through the crowd, without answering the 1,000 questions addressed to him, and re-entered the hotel. "Well," asked the two gendarmes. "Well, my boys," said the brigadier, "the brigand must really have escaped early this morning, but we will send to the Villers-Cotterettes and Noyen roads, and search the forest, when we shall catch him, no doubt." The honorable functionary had scarcely expressed himself thus, in that intonation which is peculiar to brigadiers of gendarmerie, when a loud scream, accompanied by the violent ringing of a bell, resounded to the court of the hotel. "Ah, what is that?" cried the brigadier. "Some traveler seems impatient," said the host. "What number was it that rang?" "Number 3. Run, waiter." At this moment the screams and ringing were redoubled. "Aha!" said the brigadier, stopping the servant. "The person who is ringing appears to want something more than a waiter. We will attend upon him with a gendarme." "Who occupies number 3? "The little fellow who arrived last night in a post-chaise with his sister, and who asked for an apartment with 2 beds. The bell here rang for the 3rd time, with another shriek of anguish. "Follow me, Mr. Commissary," said the brigadier. "Tread in my steps." "Wait an instant," said the host. "Number 3 has 2 staircases, inside and outside." "Good," said the brigadier. "I will take charge of the inside one. Are the carbines loaded?" "Yes, brigadier." "Well, you guard the exterior, and if he attempt to fly, fire upon him. He must be a great criminal, from what the telegraph says." The brigadier, followed by the commissary, disappeared by the inside staircase, accompanied by the noise which his assertions respecting Andrea had excited in the crowd. This is what had happened. Andrea had very cleverly managed to descend 2/3 of the chimney, but then his foot slipped, and notwithstanding his endeavors, he came into the room with more speed and noise than he intended. It would have signified little had the room been empty, but unfortunately it was occupied. 2 ladies, sleeping in one bed, were awakened by the noise, and fixing their eyes upon the spot whence the sound proceeded, they saw a man. One of these ladies, the fair one, uttered those terrible shrieks which resounded to the house, while the other, rushing to the bell rope, rang with all her strength. Andrea, as we can see, was surrounded by misfortune. "For pity's sake," he cried, pale and bewildered, without seeing whom he was addressing, "for pity's sake, do not call assistance. Save me. I will not harm you." "Andrea, the murderer!" cried one of the ladies. "Eugenie." "Mademoiselle Danglars!" exclaimed Andrea, stupefied. "Help, help!" cried Mademoiselle Darmely, taking the bell from her companion's hand and ringing it yet more violently. "Save me, I am pursued," said Andrea, clasping his hands. "For pity, for mercy's sake, do not deliver me up." "It is too late, they are coming," said Eugenie. "Well, conceal me somewhere. You can say you were needlessly alarmed. You can turn their suspicions and save my life." The 2 ladies, pressing closely to one another and drawing the bedclothes tightly around them, remained silent to this supplicating voice, repugnance and fear taking possession of their minds. "Well, be it so," at length said Eugenie. "Return by the same road you came, and we will say nothing about you, unhappy wretch." Here he is," cried a voice on the landing. "Here he is. I see him." The brigadier had put his eye to the keyhole, and had discovered Andrea in a posture of entreaty. A violent blow from the butt end of the musket burst open the lock. 2 more forced out the bolts, and the broken door fell in. Andrea ran to the other door, leading to the gallery, ready to rush out, but he was stopped short, and he stood with his body a little thrown back, pale, and with the useless knife in his clenched hand. "Fly, then," cried Mademoiselle d'Armilly, whose pity returned as her fears diminished. "Fly, or kill yourself," said Eugenie, in a tone which a Vestal in the amphitheater would have used when urging the victorious gladiator to finish his vanquished adversary. Andrea shuddered and looked on the young girl with an expression which proved how little he understood such ferocious honor. "Kill myself," he cried, throwing down his knife. "Why should I do so?" "Why, you said," answered Mademoiselle Danglars, "that you would be condemned to die like the worst criminals." "Bah!" said Cavalcanti, crossing his arms. One of his friends, the brigadier, advanced to him, sword in hand. "Come, come," said Andrea. "Sheathe your sword, my fine fellow. There is no occasion to make such a fuss, since I give myself up." And he held out his hands to be manacled. The two girls looked with horror upon this shameful metamorphosis, the man of the world shaking off his covering and appearing as a galley slave. Andrea turned toward them, and with an impertinent smile asked, "Have you any message to your father, Mademoiselle Danglars? For in all probability I shall return to Paris?" Eugenie covered her face with her hands. Oh, said Andrea, "you need not be ashamed, even though you did post after me. Was I not nearly your husband?" And with this raillery Andrea went out, leaving the two girls a prey to their own feelings of shame and to the comments of the crowd. An hour after they stepped into their calash, both dressed in feminine attire. The gate of the hotel had been closed to screen them from sight, but they were forced, when the door was open, to pass through a throng of curious glances and whispering voices. Eugenie closed her eyes, but though she could not see, she could hear, and the sneers of the crowd reached her in the carriage. "Oh, why is not the world a wilderness?" she exclaimed, throwing herself into the arms of Mademoiselle d'Armilly, her eyes sparkling with the same kind of rage which made Nero wish that the Roman world had but one neck, that he might sever it at a single blow. The next day, they stopped at the Hôtel de Flandre at Brussels. The same evening, Andrea was incarcerated in the conciergerie. Chapter 99. The Law. We have seen how quietly Mademoiselle Danglars and Mademoiselle d'Armilly accomplished their transformation and flight. The fact being that everyone was too much occupied in his or her own affairs to think of theirs. We will leave the banker contemplating the enormous magnitude of his debt before the phantom of bankruptcy, and follow the Baroness, who, after being momentarily crushed under the weight of the blow which had struck her, had gone to seek her usual adviser, Lucien Debray. The Baroness had looked forward to this marriage as a means of ridding her of a guardianship which, over a girl of Eugenie's character, could not fail to be rather a troublesome undertaking. For in the tacit relations which maintain the bond of family union, the mother, to maintain her ascendancy over her daughter, must never fail to be a model of wisdom and a type of perfection. Now, Madame Danglars feared Eugenie's sagacity and the influence of Mademoiselle d'Armilly. She had frequently observed the contemptuous expression with which her daughter looked upon Debray, an expression which seemed to imply that she understood all her mother's amorous and pecuniary relationships with the intimate secretary. Moreover, she saw that Eugenie detested Debray, not only because he was a source of dissension and scandal under paternal roof, but because she had at once classed him in that catalogue of bipeds whom Plato endeavors to withdraw from the appellation of men, and whom Diogenes designated as animals upon two legs without feathers. Unfortunately, in this world of ours, each person views things through a certain medium, and so is prevented from seeing in the same light as others, and Madame Danglars, therefore, very much regretted that the marriage of Eugenie had not taken place, not only because the match was good and likely to ensure the happiness of her child, but because it would also set her at liberty. She ran therefore to Debray, who, after having, like the rest of Paris, witnessed a contract scene and a scandal attending it, had retired in haste to his club, where he was chatting with some friends upon the events which served as a subject of conversation for 3/4 of that city known as the capital of the world. At the precise time when Madame Danglars, dressed in black and concealed in a long veil, was ascending the stairs leading to Debray's apartments, notwithstanding the assurances of the concierge that the young man was not at home, Debray was occupied in repelling the insinuations of a friend, who tried to persuade him that after the terrible scene which had just taken place he ought, as a friend of the family, to marry Mademoiselle Danglars and her 2 millions. Debray did not defend himself very warmly, for the idea had sometimes crossed his mind. Still, when he recollected the independent, proud spirit of Eugenie. He positively rejected it as utterly impossible, though the same thought again continually recurred and found a resting place in his heart. Tea, play, and the conversation, which had become interesting during the discussion of such serious affairs, lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, Madame Danglars, veiled and uneasy, awaited the return of Debray in the little green room, seated between 2 baskets of flowers, which she had that morning sent, and which, it must be confessed, Debray had himself arranged and watered with so much care that his absence was half excused in the eyes of the poor woman. At 20 minutes to 12, Madame Danglars, tired of waiting, returned home. Women of a certain grade are like prosperous grisettes in one respect. They seldom return home after 12 o'clock. The Baroness returned to the hotel with as much caution as Eugenie used in leaving it. She ran lightly upstairs, and with an aching heart entered her apartment contiguous, as we know, to that of Eugenie. She was fearful of exciting any remark, and believed firmly in her daughter's innocence and fidelity to paternal roof. She listened at Eugenie's door, and hearing no sound tried to enter, but the bolts were in place. Madame Danglars then concluded that the young girl had been overcome with the terrible excitement of the evening, and had gone to bed and to sleep. She called the maid and questioned her. Mademoiselle Eugenie, said the maid, retired to her apartment with Mademoiselle d'Armilly. They then took tea together, after which they desired me to leave, saying that they needed me no longer. Since then the maid had been below, and like everyone else she thought the young ladies were in their own room. Madame Danglars, therefore, went to bed without a shadow of suspicion, and began to muse over the recent events. In proportion as her memory became clearer, the occurrences of the evening were revealed in their true light. What she had taken for confusion was a tumult. What she had regarded as something distressing was in reality a disgrace. And then the Baroness remembered that she had felt no pity for poor Mercedes, who had been afflicted with as severe a blow through her husband and son. Eugenie, she said to herself, is lost, and so are we. The affair, as it will be reported, will cover us with shame, for in a society such as ours, satire inflicts a painful and incurable wound. How fortunate that Eugenie is possessed of that strange character which has so often made me tremble. And her glance was turned toward heaven, where mysterious providence disposes all things, and out of fault, nay, even a vice, sometimes produces a blessing. And then her thoughts, cleaving through space like a bird in the air, rested on Cavalcanti. This Andrea was a wretch, a robber, an assassin, and yet his manners showed the effects of a sort of education, if not a complete one. He had been presented to the world with the appearance of an immense fortune, supported by an honorable name. How could she extricate herself from this labyrinth? To whom would she apply to help her out of this painful situation? Debray, to whom she had run, with the first instinct of a woman towards a man she loves, and who yet betrays her. Debray could but give her advice. She must apply to someone more powerful than he. The Baroness then thought of M. de Villefort. It was M. de Villefort who had remorselessly brought misfortune into her family, as though they had been strangers. But no! On reflection, the procureur was not a merciless man. It was not the magistrate, slave to his duties, but the friend, the loyal friend, who roughly but firmly cut into the very core of the corruption. It was not the executioner, but the surgeon, who wished to withdraw the honored Danglars from ignominious association with the disgraced young man they had presented the world as their son-in-law. And since Villefort, the friend of Danglars, had acted in this way, no one could suppose that he had been previously acquainted with, or had lent himself to, any of Andrea's intrigues. Villefort's conduct, therefore, upon reflection, appeared to the Baroness as if shaped for their mutual advantage. But the inflexibility of the procureur should stop there. She would see him the next day, and if she could not make him fail in his duties, as a magistrate, she would, at least, obtain all the indulgence he could allow. She would invoke the past, recall old recollections. She would supplicate him by the remembrance of guilty, yet happy days. M. de Villefort would stifle the affair. He had only to turn his eyes on one side, and allow Andrea to fly, and follow up the crime under that shadow of guilt called contempt of court. And after this reasoning she slept easily. At 9 o'clock next morning she arose, and without ringing for her maid or giving the least sign of her activity, she dressed herself in the same simple style as on the previous night. Then running downstairs, she left the hotel, walked to the Rue de Provence, called a cab, and drove to M. de Villefort's house. For the last month, this wretched house had presented the gloomy appearance of a lazaretto infected with the plague. Some of the apartments were closed within and without. The shutters were only open to admit a minute's air, showing the scared face of a footman, and immediately afterwards a window would be closed, like a gravestone falling on a sepulchre, and the neighbors would say to each other in a low voice, "Will there be another funeral today at the procureur's house?" Madame Danglars involuntarily shuddered at the desolate aspect of the mansion. Descending from the cab, she approached the door with trembling knees and rang the bell. 3 times did the bell ring with a dull, heavy sound, seeming to participate in the general sadness, before the concierge appeared and peeped through the door, which he opened just wide enough to allow his words to be heard. He saw a lady, a fashionable, elegantly dressed lady, and yet the door remained almost closed. "Do you intend opening the door?" said the Baroness. "First, madam, who are you?" "Who am I? You know me well enough." "We no longer know anyone, madam." "You must be mad, my friend," said the Baroness. "Where do you come from?" "Oh, this is too much." "Madam, these are my orders." "Excuse me. Your name?" "The Baroness Danglars. You have seen me 20 times. "Possibly, madam. And now, what do you want?" "Oh, how extraordinary. I shall complain to Anne de Villefort of the impertinence of his servants." "Madam, this is precaution, not impertinence. No one enters here without an order from M. d'Avrigny, or without speaking to procureur. Well, I have business with the procureur." "Is it pressing business?" "You can imagine so, since I have not even brought my carriage out yet. But enough of this. Here is my card. Take it to your master. Madam will await my return?" "Yes, go." The concierge closed the door, leaving Madame Danglars in the street. She had not long to wait. Directly afterwards, the door was opened wide enough to admit her, and when she passed through, it was again shut, without losing sight of her for an instant. The concierge took a whistle from his pocket as soon as they entered court and blew it. The valet de chambre appeared on the doorsteps. "You will excuse this poor fellow, madam," he said, as he preceded the Baroness. "But his orders are precise, and M. de Villefort begged me to tell you that he could not act otherwise." In the court, showing his merchandise, was a tradesman who had been admitted with the same precautions. The Baroness ascended the steps. She felt herself strongly infected with a sadness which seemed to magnify her own, and still guided by the valet de chambre, who never lost sight of her for an instant, she was introduced to the magistrate's study. Preoccupied as Madame Danglars had been with the object of her visit, the treatment she had received from these underlings appeared to her so insulting that she began by complaining of it. But Villefort, raising his head, bowed down by grief, looked up at her with so sad a smile that her complaints died upon her lips. "Forgive my servants," he said, "for a terror I cannot blame them for. From being suspected, they have become suspicious." Madame Danglars had often heard of the terror to which the magistrate alluded, but without the evidence of her own eyesight, she could never have believed that the sentiment had been carried so far. "You too, then, are unhappy?" she said. "Yes, madam," replied the magistrate. "Then you pity me." "Sincerely, madam." "And you understand what brings me here? You wish to speak to me about the circumstance which has just happened?" "Yes, sir, a fearful misfortune." "You mean a mischance?" "A mischance," repeated the Baroness. "Alas, madam," said the procureur with his imperturbable calmness of manner, "I consider those alone misfortunes which are irreparable. And do you suppose this will be forgotten?" "Everything will be forgotten, madam," said Villefort. "Your daughter will be married tomorrow, if not today, in a week, if not tomorrow, and I do not think you can regret the intended husband of your daughter." Madame Danglars gazed on Villefort, stupefied to find him so almost insultingly calm. "Am I come to a friend?" she asked in a tone full of mournful dignity. "You know that you are, madam," said Villefort, whose pale cheeks became slightly flushed as he gave her the assurance. And truly this assurance carried him back to different events from those now occupying the Baroness and him. "Well, then, be more affectionate, my dear Villefort," said the Baroness. "Speak to me not as a magistrate, but as a friend. And when I am in bitter anguish of spirit, do not tell me that I ought to be gay." Villefort bowed. "When I hear misfortunes named, madam," he said, I have within the last few months contracted the bad habit of thinking of my own, and then I cannot help drawing up an egotistical parallel in my mind. That is the reason that by the side of my misfortunes yours appear to me mere mischances. That is why my dreadful position makes yours appear enviable. But this annoys you. Let us change the subject. You were saying, Madam, I came to ask you, my friend, said the Baroness, what will be done with this impostor? Impostor, repeated Villefort. Certainly, madam. You appear to extenuate some cases and exaggerate others. Impostor, indeed. M. Andrea Cavalcante, or rather M. Benedetto, is nothing more nor less than an assassin. Sir, I do not deny the justice of your correction, but the more severely you arm yourself against that unfortunate man, the more deeply will you strike our family. Come, forget him for a moment, and instead of pursuing him, let him go. You are too late, madam. The orders are issued. Well, should he be arrested, do they think they will arrest him? I hope so. If they should arrest him, I know that sometimes prisons afford means of escape. Will you leave him in prison? The procurer shook his head. At least keep him there till my daughter be married. Impossible, madam. Justice has its formalities. What, even for me? Said the Baroness, half jesting, half in earnest. For all, even for myself among the rest, replied Villefort. Ah! Exclaimed the Baroness, without expressing the ideas which the exclamation betrayed. Villefort looked at her with that piercing glance which reads the secrets of the heart. Yes, I know what you mean, he said. You refer to the terrible rumors spread abroad in the world, that the deaths which have kept me in mourning for the last 3 months, and from which Valentine has only escaped by a miracle, have not happened by natural means. I was not thinking of that, replied Madame Danglars quickly. Yes, you were thinking of it, and with justice. You could not help thinking of it, and saying to yourself, you, who pursue crime so vindicatively, answer now, why are there unpunished crimes in your dwelling? The Baroness became pale. You were saying this, were you not? Well, I own it. I will answer you. Villefort drew his armchair nearer to Madame Danglars. Then, resting both hands upon his desk, he said in a voice more hollow than usual, there are crimes which remain unpunished because the criminals are unknown, and we might strike the innocent instead of the guilty. But when the culprits are discovered, Villefort here extended his hand toward a large crucifix placed opposite to his desk. When they are discovered, I swear to you, by all I hold most sacred, that whoever they may be, they shall die. Now, after the oath I have just taken, and which I will keep, madam, dare you ask for mercy for that wretch? But, sir, are you sure he is as guilty as they say? Listen, this is his description. Benedetto condemned at the age of 16 for 5 years to the galleys for forgery. He promised, well, as you see, first a runaway, then an assassin. And who is this wretch? Who can tell? A vagabond, a Corsican. Has no one owned him? No one, his parents are unknown. But who was the man who brought him from Lucca? Another rascal like himself, perhaps his accomplice. The Baroness clasped her hands. Villefort, she exclaimed in her softest and most captivating manner. For heaven's sake, madam, said Villefort, with a firmness of expression not altogether free from harshness, for heaven's sake, do not ask pardon of me for a guilty wretch. What am I? The law. Has the law any eyes to witness your grief? Has the law ears to be melted by your sweet voice? Has the law a memory for all those soft recollections you endeavor to recall? No, madam. The law is commanded, and when it commands, it strikes. You will tell me that I am a living being and not a code, a man and not a volume. Look at me, madam. Look around me. Has mankind treated me as a brother? Have men loved me? Have they spared me? Has anyone shown the mercy towards me that you now ask at my hands? No, madam, they struck me, always struck me. Woman, siren that you are, do you persist in fixing on me that fascinating eye, which reminds me that I ought to blush? Well, be it so. Let me blush for the faults you know, and perhaps for even more than those. But having sinned myself, it may be more deeply than others, I never rest till I have torn the disguises from my fellow creatures and found out their weaknesses. I have always found them, and more, I repeat it with joy, with triumph. I've always found some proof of human perversity or error. Every criminal I condemn seems to me living evidence that I am not a hideous exception to the rest. Alas, 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 all the world is wicked. Let us therefore strike at wickedness." Villefort pronounced these last words with feverish rage, which gave a ferocious eloquence to his words. "But," said Madame Danglars, resolving to make a last effort, "this young man, though a murderer, is an orphan abandoned by everybody. So much the worse, or rather, so much the better. It has been so ordained that he may have none to weep his fate. But this is trampling on the weak, sir. The weakness of a murderer. His dishonor reflects upon us. Is not death in my house?" "Oh, sir," exclaimed the Baroness, "you are without pity for others. Well, then, I tell you they will have no mercy on you." "Be it so," said Villefort, raising his arms to heaven with a threatening gesture. "At least, delay the trial till the next assizes. We shall then have 6 months before us." "No, madam," said Villefort. "Instructions have been given. There are yet 5 days left. 5 days are more than I require. Do you not think that I also long for forgetfulness? While working night and day, I sometimes lose all recollection of the past, and then I experience the same sort of happiness I can imagine the dead feel. Still, it is better than suffering. But, sir, he has fled. Let him escape. Inaction is a pardonable offense. I tell you it is too late. Early this morning the telegraph was employed, and at this very minute—" "Sir," said the valet de chambre, entering the room, "a dragoon has brought this dispatch from the Minister of the Interior." Villefort seized the letter and hastily broke the seal. Madame Danglars trembled with fear. Villefort started with joy. "Arrested!" he exclaimed. "He was taken at Compiègne, and all is over." Madame Danglars rose from her seat, pale and cold. "Adieu, sir," she said. "Adieu, madam," replied the king's attorney, as in an almost joyful manner he conducted her to the door. Then, turned to his desk, he said, striking the letter with the back of his right hand, "Come, I had a forgery, 3 robberies, and 2 cases of arson. I only wanted a murder, and here it is. It will be a splendid session.